Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the first of the Spring 2024 SunokisisDC Digital Classics semester. This is the spring semester, which, as has been the case for the last few years, is on the theme of digital approaches to cultural heritage. And this semester is organised generally and will generally be chaired by myself, Gabriel, Bodard, and also by my colleague from the University of Leipzig, who's not with us here today, but will be around for most of the semester, Monica Berti. Today's session, which I'll introduce more in a few minutes, is on digital editing of epigraphy and of ancient texts generally, and is presented by three of us. So myself and my colleagues, Nora White at Maynooth University and Martina Filosa at the University of Köln, who will also introduce themselves in a minute, just before they present their parts. And maybe you can just sort of say a few words saying how you're involved in this topic. But just a couple of notes about how these SunoikisisDC sessions work. We're streaming this live, so if you're watching this at 4 p.m. GMT on the 11th of January 2024, then you are watching live, and it would be great if you could use the live chat, which is either just to the right or just below your YouTube video. Just to write us a quick note now, tell us you're watching, tell us who you are, where you are. It'd be really great to see you there. But also, throughout the session, if you have any questions on what we're talking about or any comments, please leave those in the live chat as well. We'll keep an eye on them, and if you have questions, we'll try to address them either during or at the end of the session. And at the end, when we'll have discussion, we'll be discussing between three of us, but also we very much hope that you'll all get involved in that discussion. We're going to end by talking about some of the implications, both legal and ethical and academic implications, of some of the technologies and methods that we're talking about in this session. So I think it's particularly important that we get several other voices in there. None of us claim to be the authoritative expert on everything related to this topic. So over the course of this semester, we'll be talking about a range of digital humanities approaches. Some of them will specifically be technological approaches and software, and some of them will be more sort of methodological or standards or new ways of working that have been enabled by technology. And the session we're talking about today, about digital editing of ancient texts, has a little bit of all of those things. It is a specific technology, but it also is more than a specific technology. It is to do with the way in which we work as a result of various developments in the disciplines, some of which are technological and some of which precede the technological. We'll be talking about developments from over 100 years ago that have really led to the way we work now, as part of what we're talking about. And so we're particularly interested in how this changes the way, or how this impacts on the way in which we do historical scholarship. And those will be, I think, the important questions that we'll be thinking about and discussing at the end. And as I say, we're very interested in all of your input on that. I should say, by the way, that having said hello to all the people who are watching live, if you're not watching this live, if you're watching this later sometime in the future, welcome also, but unfortunately you can't leave us comments that we will see. You can leave comments in YouTube comments in the usual way that we might see one day in the future, but we won't be able to respond to them in the video. That's but we're really glad that you're watching anyway. Okay, so for this session, we're going to talk about a range of aspects of digital encoding of ancient text, and I'm going to start by giving a quick sort of overview of the topic, and then an introduction to epigraphy, and in particular to digital epigraphy. And this is hang on just a second. This is the outline of the session that we'll be presenting. So I will give this introduction, as I said, to ancient texts and to digital editing of ancient texts, and then Nora is going to talk a bit about object description and object history, in the context of digital editing, using as an example her project on medieval Irish and Ogham inscriptions. And then Martina is going to talk about the digital encoding of process and metadata as part of this set of standards and practices, using the example of her work on Byzantine seals, which are another kind of ancient text written on physical objects. And this will lead into a discussion in general, which, as I say, we will kick off, but we really hope you will participate in, on legal and ethical responsibilities and academic implications and other factors that arise from working in this sort of way. I should say also, as well as being very happy to see comments at any point during this session, that Nora and Martina, if at any point you want to sort of jump in and interject on anything I'm talking about, either to add clarification or to ask a question, or even just to tell me to hurry up, please do feel free to unmute and do so. I will try to keep an eye on time. First up, I'm going to, just on the assumption that not everybody watching will necessarily know what I mean when I say epigraphy, I'll quickly define what we mean by paleography and epigraphy, where we're basically talking about a text that was written in the ancient world, or in the historical period that we're studying, that we're interested in, and we have a copy, we have the unique original copy of that text that was written by and read by the ancients themselves. So in this case, we've got a piece of stone written on in ancient Greek from the city of Aphrodisias in Asia Minor, in I forget the exact date, but sometime in the Roman imperial period, I think. It was written in a single copy, and this is the only copy that ever existed, and we have that copy. Rather than a lot of ancient texts that we have as a result of medieval manuscript copies of those texts that have been copied and recopied and recopied, sometimes with selections and changes and errors throughout those texts as they go. So this is what we call a paleographic text. This is the ancient writing that we are reading itself. And so other copies of this, there are wall paintings, there are graffiti of this kind, such as this one from Pompeii. There are texts that have been scratched into fragments of pottery, like these ostraca that we have here. There are coins which have writing on them, very often that were stamped. These were made in many, many copies, but quite often we only have a few copies of each type. There are seals, such as these lead seal copies. These are seal impressions from the medieval Greek world that again have multiple copies. Very often, few copies of each will survive and exist. They're unique objects in that sense. There are texts written on various paper or paper-like materials. This is an example from papyrus. There's also parchment and paper itself that we used at various historical periods. That again, in the pre-modern period, these tended to be unique, or at least physically interesting, in the sense that each copy had its own unique features. But many of the texts, especially those that we're interested in when we're talking about paleography, are unique copies. Someone wrote one copy. It's not that many copies were made and published and sold and distributed and so forth. We also have writing on vases, illustrated vases. There's a label across the top of this vase, mentioning some of the possibly describing some of the people who are in the image, or saying who made the object, or something. There's just another example of a magical text. This is a cursed tablet that was written on, and then it was rolled up and had a nail driven through it, and was buried underground somewhere and found several hundred years later. So these are all objects that are written on in the ancient world, in the single copy, and we have that single copy, and we're reading it both as a text but also as an object, and that's sort of the distinction of the kind of text that we're talking about when we're talking about all three of the disciplines represented by the three of us here, all of whom use EpiDoc as our encoding scheme for these things. the distinction between these objects is sometimes not so much a clear and rational distinction between types of object or types of text, as it is a distinction between disciplines. It's a discipline that's been it's a distinction that's been imposed by disciplines. So this is the discipline of epigraphy, which has largely been focused on inscriptions, that is to say, text written on stone, usually monumental, usually for public display, for recording of important documents that were meant to survive, that were meant to be read, meant to be visible. They may have been on other materials, they may have been on metals, they may have been on other objects, they may have been on portable objects, but nevertheless they tended to be large and monumental in one way or another. The discipline of papyrology, in contrast, specifically arose in the late 19th century with the discovery of vast numbers of texts written on papyrus and parchment and other materials from Egypt. And the distinction, therefore, between epigraphy and papyrology is not entirely between stone and papyrus, and it's not entirely between public and private, and it's not entirely between one geographic region and another. It's to do with the distinction between what's of interest to these disciplines. So there are objects which you might think look more like inscriptions than they do like papyri, but they're studied by papyrologists, like wooden writing tablets, like lead writing tablets, like ostraca that are made of fired pottery, and so forth, and they tend to be read by papyrologists. Epigraphists are sometimes interested in some subsets of those, but they have their identity as a result of the discipline. So that sometimes can be a bit irrational. On the other hand, graffiti, which are written in some sense for public display, even if they're not monumental texts in a normal sense, are often read by epigraphists, even though they're, in terms of their paleography and their handwriting, they're much more like the sort of scrappy handwritten text that papyrologists are good at reading, right? So the distinctions aren't always rational, they're to do with interest and discipline. Then there are disciplines like numismatics who are interested in these texts, regardless of what they look like or what they say, if they're stamped onto coins. Sigillography, who are interested in text, regardless of where they're from and what they're about, if they're written on seals, which are intended to be stamped into lead or wax or some other material to seal documents, for example. There are people who study, diplomatics, who study various kinds of documents that were recorded, sometimes in multiple copies, sometimes on durable materials, sometimes not. And there's a discipline of codicology, which tends to study things that are in things that look to us like books, that we think of as a book, but can include other things that are book-like, but not necessarily shaped by having multiple pages and a spine. They can include scrolls and other objects that tend to record texts that were meant to be read, that were meant to be in many copies, and so forth. So they're slightly different, but these things may be made of papyrus, for example, or may be made of some materials that are often read by other disciplines. So there are overlaps, and there are sometimes slightly woolly, or sometimes slightly arbitrary distinctions between these things. So just a quick note, when we say epigraphy, we're talking about materials written often on durable materials and often for monumental purpose. Why did people write on stone in the ancient world? And the answer is often for the same sorts of reasons that we still do now. So there are gravestones. The vast majority of things that are written on stone today are gravestones, like the one on the right. I mean, that's not written today. That's a few hundred years old, but nevertheless, it's modern. We recognize, we can read it. It says it's written in English. And you'd see something like that in a graveyard, probably not far from where you live, quite without any surprise. The copy on the left is a gravestone written a couple of thousand years ago. Very similar concept, right? You're writing as a monument for a person who's died on the place that their remains are laid to rest. That's the vast majority of ancient inscriptions as well, are funerary inscriptions. You've then got texts that are written as labels for buildings. So this may be, as the modern example on the right for Bush House, that it's telling you what building it is, or it may be, as the example on the left, it's not telling you what building it is. It doesn't actually say the name of this building. Anyway, what it does is it tells you who set it up and who paid for it and so forth. But nevertheless, it's a label. It's a label for the building. It has the same sort of function. These may be among the most visible. They're also relatively rare, just because there are far fewer buildings than there are dead people, I guess. But other examples are statue base or other kinds of honorific texts. So again, a modern example on the right. We see these everywhere. All of our cities have multiple examples of statues of people. It's not necessarily where that person is from or where that person is buried. But it's where that person is being honored for whatever reason, with some text underneath it, honoring them in some way. In the example on the left, we can't see the statue in the example on the left anymore, but it's exactly the same. It clearly had a statue on the top, and the text underneath is honoring that person who was on that statue. So there's various reasons why text was written on stones. What's slightly less common now, and was also quite more common in the ancient world, was that laws and decrees and treaties and other things that major state decisions that had been made will have been written down on stone in order to express the importance and the intended eternal duration of these agreements and treaties and these sorts of materials. And so we have some quite a lot of materials like this from the ancient world, which are really important records of historical events and documents. So who reads inscriptions? Why might we be interested in reading inscriptions from the ancient world, and who reads them and who has read them at various points in history? So as a very short and incomplete list, here are some people who have read ancient Greek and Roman inscriptions of the kind that I've been showing you examples of at various times. So starting right back, within a few years of them being written, there are 6th century BC and early 5th century BC inscriptions in Greek, in ancient Greece, that are read a generation later by historians like Herodotus and Thucydides as evidence for the historical events that they're narrating in their historical texts. Right? So they were already being used as evidence for history at the time. They weren't reading them and editing them in the way that we edit inscriptions, but they were citing them as evidence for what someone a generation earlier said about the events, the historical events in their time. A few hundred years later, there are anthologists. For example, the Byzantine collectors who collected together examples of ancient Greek poetry in various anthologies, the Palatine Anthology and others, where a large number of those pieces of poetry and verse that they found were found on inscriptions from various parts of the world and are transcribed as such. And sometimes it tells us where they found those inscriptions. Later in the medieval and early modern period, we have antiquarians going around collecting inscriptions. People are very excited about ancient Rome, and if they find examples of writing from ancient Rome or ancient Greece, they will pick those up and record them or draw them or transcribe them or steal them and take them across the world to their home, which also happens quite a lot. More recently, again, ancient historians use this as part of our primary evidence for the study of the ancient world. This has been done, obviously, throughout history, I mean, all the way back to ancient times itself, but it started being done in a really methodical way in the 19th century with scholars like the German historian Mommsen. And historians today obviously read inscriptions for the same reasons, both the same inscriptions that have been around for hundreds of years, that we've known about, and have been around for thousands of years, but that we've known about for hundreds of years, but also inscriptions that are newly being discovered are being read by historians for the historical evidence that they give us. And finally, philologists are interested in looking at inscriptions for what it tells us about ancient language, for the evolution of language, for the evolution of spelling, for the evolution of pronunciation, for paleography, for letter forms themselves, and for writing techniques. And to this we could add archaeologists and art historians and so forth. Modern scholars read inscriptions for all sorts of reasons. So as a result of this growing discipline of reading ancient inscriptions, we have been, over the last decades and century or so, developing more and more standards for regularization and and consistency in the way in which we edit and record these inscriptions. So the first really coherent expression of this was in the Leiden system, which was written down and agreed and described in about 1931 at a meeting of papyrologists originally in Leiden, but it was also adopted by epigraphists at around the same time. This basically codified what had been done over the past few decades already, which was making it visually clear in your transcription which of the letters and words you're writing are still visible on the stone, have been restored by you from lost parts of the stone, have been interpreted by you from difficult to read parts of the stone, and have been corrected by you from parts of the stone where you think the ancient stonecutter or scribe made an error. And so, for example, if we have a lot of inscriptions are like this inscription, you can see all sorts of things wrong with it. One is it's been broken into 3 pieces and had to be reconstructed. The second is that those 3 pieces are not the whole text. It's clearly started much further to the left than the stone survives. And the third is that surface is pretty worn. You've got all sorts of damage, so a lot of the letters are no longer legible or even completely disappeared. And even those that are legible, like these over here on the right in the second line, are a little bit harder to read. So when you transcribe this, you really want to make clear to your reader which parts of these are actually on the stone and which parts you're helping, your scholarship has helped you to understand better. So a transcription of this stone, which is the inscriptions of Roman Tripolitania number 256A, in case you want to go look it up, will look something like this. And this is from the IRT website. So the parts of the inscription that are that were completely lost, you remember the entire left of this stone was completely lost. Those parts are in those square brackets that you see there. There are also abbreviations on the stone, which are represented using these round brackets, as you see here, these parentheses. And there are corrections to where we think the ancient scribe made an error, written using these angle brackets to represent. So these various different brackets, these are the Leiden system for recording information about the kind of interventions you've made in the text. There are also other symbols in here. There is this chorion, this tick here, showing you that is a number, not just a letter, because Greek numbers were written using letters. There's this dot beneath a character, showing that character is present on the stone, but it is quite damaged. You saw a lot of the letters on there were very worn, and therefore you're just letting the reader know that you've interpreted that letter a little bit, and it's probably that. And then there are other symbols which you don't really need to be explained quite as much because they're conventions we use normally, such as the hyphen showing that a word is continuing across 2 lines, the numbering of lines in the left margin, and so forth. But these are all things which are typographical interventions in the text, which are telling the reader something extra textual, but it's important philological information about the text. And so what we end up with is the Leiden system, of which this is a slight simplification. But there are various things we might want to say about it, and then there are these arbitrary and unambiguous symbols on the left there, showing how we record that piece of information on the page. And this, as I say, is pretty much how it was devised in 1931 and has been used in this way for the 90+ years since, with minor variations across and within disciplines sometimes, but the part that is on this page is pretty much unchanged from 1931. So fast forwarding 70 years from 1931, we've got around the turn of the millennium the introduction of a set of digital standards called EpiDoc. So I won't go through everything on this slide, but what EpiDoc did was not try to invent a new Leiden system for machine-readable recording of inscriptions, but rather using all of these, using all sorts of existing standards to recommend the best practice for the use of these standards for recording epigraphic philological distinctions in machine readable forms. So they recommend the use of the XML scheme of the text encoding initiative, which has been in use since the 1980s, for recording humanities texts of one kind or another. They recommend keeping the distinctions from the Leiden system, but just mapping them onto those TEI distinctions. They recommend keeping the same sorts of database fields or categories of information that we've been seeing in corpora since the 19th century, and databases since the late mid 20th century. And some of the corpora and some of the databases are listed on here, but I won't explain what they all are. And it was not very long before EpiDoc was mapped in the same way that Leiden was adopted by different disciplines. That EpiDoc was also mapped onto papyrology, onto other types of ancient inscribed objects, including seals, coins, stamps, and so forth, and onto other scripts and other languages, including cuneiform Mayan, Mycenaean, and as we'll hear in a few minutes, the Ogham inscriptions and many other languages and scripts. There are projects working on Sanskrit and other inscriptions and other languages using EpiDoc or variants of EpiDoc. So just as you would likely, if you see a print edition or some an edition of an inscription in a corpus like the CIL, you would probably see these categories of information in it. An epigraphic edition recorded in digital form has exactly the same categories of information in a conventional edition. So you've got the physical description, you've got location information of various kinds, you've got dating information of various kinds, you've got information about previous editions, and mapping to other reference numbers for these texts and objects. And you've got the text itself, you've got the translation, you've got commentary, and similar. EpiDoc, I've said EpiDoc is a way of doing this. EpiDoc is both a set of recommendations and it's a set of tools for the use of these recommendations, and it's a community who work to improve and disseminate these recommendations and tools. So it's a slightly sort of hybrid term that refers to all three of these things. So this is the slide I showed you a minute ago about with the summary of the Leiden scheme. And as I say, EpiDoc takes the Leiden system and doesn't change what we're distinguishing between from this left-hand side, but just changes how we express it. And so in a machine readable way, using the XML recommendations of the TEI, it says that when you have text that you were to put in square brackets in Leiden, which means these are characters which are completely lost now from the original, but which can be restored by the editor by their judgment, by their guesswork, or by comparison with other texts. You can simply say use this TEI tag supplied with a subcategorization of that with reason lost. So this is text that is supplied by the editor because it was completely lost from the original, distinguished from text which is still visible on the stone but not entirely legible, which is written as unclear. This is not supplied, it's not restored because it is still there. It's just we're flagging that it's maybe slightly an insecure or a speculative reconstruction of that text. And with that, I think I'll hand over to Nora. The next slide. Again, if anyone has any questions, please do use chat to say so. And I'm going to go back to the full screen. Yeah, Nora, whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much, Gabby, and hi to everyone. I'm Nora White. I'm a postdoctoral researcher in the Department of Early Irish at Maynooth University in Ireland. My research is around the earliest surviving texts in the Irish language, using increasingly more digital methods and tools to document, analyse and publish the material. This research encompasses the medieval period in Ireland and to a lesser extent Britain from the 4th to the 12th century AD. The very earliest writing in Irish is in a script called Ogham. But with conversion to Christianity in Ireland, the Latin or Roman alphabet gradually replaces Ogham in most contexts, although the native script never dies out completely. For the purposes of this presentation, I will focus on inscriptions in the Ogham script, but just to note that I am also working on a digital corpus of the slightly later inscriptions in insular Latin script, a small sample of which are available here at this website. So I will start by introducing the Ogham script and its peculiarities, which is necessary to understand the importance of a holistic, interdisciplinary approach, as well as demonstrating the challenges we face in its encoding. I will then also give a brief overview of the work carried out so far in digitizing and creating digital editions of the material. Ogham is an alphabetic writing system which exhibits much variation across time and space. Our earliest surviving examples of the script are on monumental pillars. Here are two examples from Southwest Ireland. On the left, our tallest Ogham stone, almost 5 meters, probably a prehistoric standing stone onto which an Ogham inscription was added on one angle, the nearest angle there, on or around the early 5th century AD. Then on the right, this stone was probably sourced specifically to be Ogham inscribed, and it has text on 3 angles, but was discovered in 1855, reused as building material in the wall of an early Christian oratory. At the time, it was removed, and it has since been displayed inside the Romanesque cathedral ruins on site. The majority of Ogham stones are from Ireland, roughly 400, with approximately another 80 or so found in parts of Britain where the Irish settled in the post-Roman period. Most of these date from the 4th to the 7th century AD, although there are some regional differences. It is likely that the script was previously used on other more perishable materials such as wood. However, with just a couple of possible exceptions, examples on other materials discovered so far are predominantly a bit later than inscriptions on stone. These include inscriptions on portable, generally personal, private objects made of antler, bone, wood, silver, and even an amber bead of just 1 centimeter in diameter. Ogham is also found in manuscripts, mainly post-12th century, but the use of the script in later periods hasn't received the same attention as the earlier examples on stone monuments, and the later developments around Ogham are only now being properly studied. Ogham is visually very unlike the Latin alphabet on which it is otherwise based. It consists of barcode-like series of parallel lines. The layout is also different, as Ogham, in this early stage at least, displayed vertically along the edge or arse of a stone pillar rather than horizontally on the face. It generally reads upwards, sometimes continuing across the top of the stone and down the opposite angle, and occasionally even up on 2 or more angles. And always wrapping around the edge of the stone, as you can see here, making it essentially a 3-dimensional script. This has made illustrating Ogham inscriptions a specific challenge from the earliest days of Ogham studies. And I particularly like this example from the late 19th century, where Samuel Ferguson photographed flattened out paper casts of Ogham stones so that the 3-dimensionality could be viewed in 2 dimensions. The content of Ogham inscriptions is very limited and rarely includes anything more than personal names in the genitive case. However, Ogham inscriptions are effectively the only source of knowledge about the Irish language for the crucial period around the middle of the 1st millennium, when primitive Irish was transformed from a traditional old Indo-European language into a modern insular Celtic language. The development of the language in this period was so rapid that primitive Irish resembles Old Irish as much or as little as Latin resembles French, even though only 3 centuries separates the 2 stages of the language. And this is why I suppose there has been an emphasis very much on this early stage of Ogham. The script was designed specifically for the sounds of primitive Irish by someone familiar with Latin sometime before or perhaps during the 4th century AD. The key to the original 20 characters is partly based on information supplied in later manuscript sources, demonstrating that knowledge of Ogham was not lost after the monumental phase of Ogham died out, although the function and form of the script changed considerably. The Ogham characters are divided into 4 groups, or acma in Irish. 2 of the groups are distinguished by the orientation of 1 to 5 horizontal strokes relative to a vertical stem line, generally the physical edge of the stone or the aris. The 3rd group crosses the stem line diagonally, and the 4th group consists of 1 to 5 shorter strokes or notches, generally on the stem line, representing the vowels. There has also been some experimentation with additional letters to make up for the perceived gaps in the writing system. These forfida become more prominent later on in the manuscript tradition, but at least one of these, the so-called X forfeit, is quite frequently encountered in earlier inscriptions. Over 10 years ago, we initiated a new approach to recording and documenting Ogham with a project using 3-dimensional imaging technologies to digitize Ogham stones. The Ogham in 3D project was based at the Dublin Institute for Advanced Studies, with project partners the Irish National Monument Service, a branch of the Irish Government Department of Heritage, and the Discovery Programme with expertise in 3D recording and modelling. Computational imaging tools such as structured light scanning and photogrammetry were used to digitize Ogham stones, creating 3D models of many of the Irish stones and their inscriptions. However, the 3D models needed metadata on both the objects and their texts. TEI XML encoding of the Ogham stones and their inscriptions was chosen to ensure machine readability and interoperability, to facilitate transparency, searchability, reusability, and sustainability in as much as that can be achieved. EpiDoc guidelines were the obvious choice for inscribed monuments. And just to note that this on the slide here is an early attempt to loosely follow an early version of the EpiDoc guidelines, and these are now being updated to the latest version. One of the main benefits of using EpiDoc is that it addresses not only the transcription and editorial treatment of texts, but also the history and materiality of the objects on which the texts appear, as well as the original context, place, and circumstances of finding and current location. Once all of the data was encoded, we then used the XML files to generate our online digital corpus, with the EpiDoc files freely available to download along with the 3D models. The XML encoding also allowed us to filter and search the data, for example, names found in the inscriptions, site type and context, carving style, and so on, displaying the results as a list of links to individual records, as well as visualized on a map. Ogham stones from Ireland are relatively homogeneous, almost all in either primitive or early Old Irish, with inscriptions along the edge of the stone using the physical angle or the aris as a stem line. However, outside of Ireland, there's much regional variation. In Scotland, for example, we find 6 Ogham stones with Irish names from traditional Gaelic-speaking areas of Dalriada or modern Argyll, but over 30 from the Pictish kingdoms, mostly from the east coast of Scotland, as well as the Orkney and Shetland Islands. These are generally a little later and notoriously difficult to decipher or even to identify the language, and maybe in the little-known Pictish language. Some are found on the same stone along with Pictish symbols, such as this one on the slide. Note also in this image that a stem line is carved onto the face for the Ogham rather than using the edge of the stone, and the vowels are represented as straight lines or strokes of equal length with consonants, rather than the more distinctive notches typical on Irish Ogham stones. In 2021, we were awarded funding through the UK-Ireland Digital Humanities Scheme to complete a digital corpus of Ogham as initiated in the Ogham in 3D project, but to go beyond the earlier inscriptions on stone in Ireland to include examples of Ogham on other supports from other areas and from later periods. This project is a collaboration between researchers in the Early Irish Department at Maynooth University and colleagues at the University of Glasgow. One of the main aspects of Ogham that we are concerned with on this project, one that has largely been neglected up to now, is this variation in the script across place and time. Ogham is not a static writing system that can be encapsulated in a single standard format. Speaking of which, Ogham was included in Unicode in 1999, and the Unicode block includes the 20-letter characters of the primary 4 ACME, plus 5 supplementary letters of the forfida, an Ogham space character, and 2 feather markers, a punctuation feature of manuscript and portable object Ogham. However, Ogham's inclusion in Unicode is intended primarily for modern purposes rather than for transcribing historical texts, and so its usefulness in our digital editions is unfortunately quite limited. Inscriptions from Scotland, again in particular, as well as in manuscript material, present us with an array of alternative letter forms that are not included in Unicode. On the current project, we are following more closely the latest EpiDoc guidelines, and we're at version 9.5, I think, at the moment. So originally designed for classical epigraphy, EpiDoc has, as Gabby was just saying, has been expanding and updating to accommodate other scripts and languages. And as you can see from the screenshot of the website here, it includes various transcription styles and guidelines for specialized communities. Here is an example of alignment of EpiDoc with cuneiform, and we are currently working on a similar type of alignment with Ogham and EpiDoc. But before we can do that, we have to agree among ourselves in Ogham studies on a standard for transcription and transliteration of Ogham. And here we have the EpiDoc, Leiden and EpiDoc quick reference sheet for transcription. And most of these actually work quite well for Ogham. But for example, when you have, again, a lacuna or a gap where characters are missing, which you want to quantify, and again, for example, the EpiDoc encoding has gap, reason equals lost, quantity 3, unit character. You can't count character as a unit with Ogham, as characters vary between 1 and 5 strokes, so take up a different amount of space on the object. So we have to think about how best to encode this for Ogham. Also, features like feather marks and forfida, for which specific tags, of course, don't exist. These can be accommodated using, for example, glyphs and character elements, the G and the C here. And another challenge with Ogham and other scripts as well is varying text direction, not simply just left to right, but Ogham is generally vertical, but sometimes it goes in a circle or following an irregular angle on an object. And these are also challenging to encode. So I'll just finish with an example of an Ogham stone recently encoded using the latest EpiDoc guidelines. I don't know if I have time to go into too much detail here, but just to point out that we have in the support description, we have encoded, for example, the material type, the object type, the dimensions. And again, in the layout description, we have the carving technique recorded and with linking to the external Eagle network vocabularies. Within the edition itself, of course, the text direction, the personal names and the formula words are encoded with links to the equivalent entries in the EDIL dictionary, that's the electronic dictionary of the Irish language. And finally, last but not least, the inclusion of an image where possible of the inscribed object, and in the case of Ogham, ideally a 3D model, and I've included a link there to the 3D model on Sketchfab. And I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Nora. That's great. If anyone has any comments, again, please do go ahead and ask them. In the meantime, we'll hand over to Martina.
Thank you so much. Can you see my screen?
We can now.
Okay, perfect. Amazing. Thank you so much. I'm Martina Filosa from the University of Cologne. My research is in Byzantine sigillography and lately also in digital Byzantine studies and sigillography. And that's what we're going to talk about in the next couple of minutes. So, this is a lead seal, and also Gabby showed some of them earlier when he was delivering his introduction. And now we go, let's say, from Ireland, we go to the east. We're talking about the Greek-speaking Christian medieval empire from the 4th to the 15th century, roughly, centered around Constantinople, let's say the Byzantine Empire. And as you might know, most of the archives, if not all of the archives of the Byzantine Empire, have been destroyed throughout the centuries. That's why we do not have that many written documents, but we do have many thousands of the seals that accompanied them. So you have to imagine whenever you were writing a letter or you were sending out some document, you would need a seal to secure it, right? And the seal had some purposes in its life. That was to secure the document it was traveling with, but also to inform the addressee of your letter or document of whom was sending it out. As you can see here on the screen, this is a lead seal, and most of the seals that we have are actually made out of lead, even though we have some gold seals, which was a privilege reserved to the emperor. We have a bunch of silver seals, but the greatest majority of seals are actually made out of lead. And we are now at an estimate of 100,000 seals that have been discovered up to now. As you can see on the slide, the most, let's say, the biggest, the major feature about seals is that they have two sides, which are called obverse and reverse. And usually on seals, we have both text and iconography. And whenever we are publishing a seal, we are not just interested in the text that they transmit. We're interested in the object that they represent. And that's why we're going to talk about how we deal with text-bearing objects. So, Byzantine seals are at the center of a couple of projects right now, but I would like to tell you more about the Digibit seal project, which is funded by the Deutsche Forschungsgemeinschaft and the Agence Nationale de Recherche, and it is settled in Cologne and in Paris. As you can see on the slide. And the aim of this seal is to further develop EpiDoc, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. And by doing so, let's say as a byproduct, if I can say so, we will publish circa 4,000 seals. Because in order for the encoding standard to grow and to be widely adopted, it has to be tested, right? And some of the collections that we are working with are here on the slide, and they are both published and unpublished, and both public and private. The final aim, if I can say so, of this Digibit seal project is to create a meta corpus of Byzantine seals, which is encoded in SigiDoc XML. And one of the most important things is that each object, so each seal, will be assigned a permanent unique identifier, because we're making, let's say, a big digital resource, and you want to pinpoint a specific item in this otherwise very big and confusing edition. The aim of, once again, of this project is to create this, let's say, meta corpus that will reunite all of the collections that I showed before, and hopefully many more. And all of these collections, thanks to the infrastructure in which we are publishing them, and we're going to talk about that in a second, they will be searchable. So it will be possible to perform queries across all collections that are encoded in SigiDoc. And these queries are just not plain text. They will be searchable according to some search criteria that we have outlined, and then Edita will show you in a second. And these search criteria, they allow you to perform a fine-grained search as well as automatic indexing. And all of these queries that you will be able to perform, they try to cover most of the interesting topics for Byzantine scholars, such as, for example, administration history, prosopography, linguistics, art history, geography, and many more. So here you can see the filters, the search filters that we implemented. And if you're familiar with EFIS, with EpiDoc front-end services, you will straight away recognize the format that EFIS kind of gives you in order to create your filtered search. And that is to say, long story short, that we are using SigiDoc XML for the encoding and EFIS for the publication of our corpora. So at the very top, you can see the date slide. So you can filter your results. And here you can see all the filters that pertain both to the history of the object, but also to the content of the text. For example, personal names, family names, or place names, if they're mentioned, but also offices, dignities, and once again, terms that are interesting because of their because of linguistics. For example, Marian terms, Christ-related terms, saint-related terms, but also if a legend is metrical, and if it is metrical, which kind of matter does it have, or which kind of case is displayed on the seal, and also iconography, and so on and so forth. So once again, you can see here that we have tried to cater to as many needs of the community as we could. So we've been talking about SigiDoc a bit, but what it is. So SigiDoc is like the small sister of EpiDoc, if I can say so. It is an XML-based and EpiDoc compliant data model, which has been customized for the digital scholarly edition of Byzantine seals and other coin-like objects, which is an important addition, and you will see in a minute why. And also for the digitally enhanced conversion of paper published editions. Because if you remember what I said a couple of minutes ago, we're not only in our project dealing with unpublished material, we're also dealing with paper published editions that need to be updated because they are not they're not easily findable, first of all. So you can't find them in every library, and let alone on the internet, because they were usually printed in a very limited edition of a couple of items, for example. But also they are outdated. They are not. They are useful, but up to a point. You can't perform queries across hundreds of thousands of objects. Further, SigiDoc, just like EpiDoc, is both machine and human readable and machine actionable. And we're going to see later in the discussion why this is so important for accessibility and for interoperability of data. Once again, as I said before, the collections and the seals encoded in the framework of the Digibit Seal project, they offer the very much needed critical mass for testing the encoding standards and also to further develop it. And in a couple of months, we will launch the version 2.0, which has been improved and expanded. And also, I think I forgot to write it on the slide. Pardon me. The CGDoc schema is the first EpiDoc chained auth. But please, Gabby and Nora, correct me if I'm wrong. So we tried to be as compliant to EpiDoc as possible. Further, as EpiDoc and just like TI, CGDoc strives to be fair, to comply to the fair and as much as we can to the care principles in our editions. Here, I mean, when you're going to download the slides here, you will be able to go to this website where we have all the user guides as well as the structure of the meta corpus.
Martina, sorry to interrupt. Can I ask you just to expand to two acronyms you just used there? Could you tell us what is an odd?
Yes.
What is fair and what is care?
Definitely. So the FAIR principle. The acronym. Oh God. Accessible, interoperable, reusable, and what does the findable? Sorry. The FAIR principles are all about an edition or an item, a digital resource to be findable. So to just like we were saying before, to give, for example, to something a permanent unique identifier where you can pinpoint to something in a unique way. So this is also a step towards the FAIR principles. The A stands for accessible, so to make everything as accessible as possible. And this accessibility both takes into account impairments, for example, people who can't see or people who are who can't see very well. Try, for example, instead of just a plain picture, to write also an alternative text, for example, so that it can also be read by a text to voice system. Further, interoperable, for example, having the support for linked open data makes things as interoperable as it gets, but also, and first and foremost, for example, using an already established solutions, for example, like EpiDoc, and not reinventing the wheel and creating a bespoke solution just for the edition of your items. And the R is for reusable, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. And also Nora showed us that you can download and reuse the files of her OM project, and this will be the case also for everything that is in EpiDoc and CGDoc. And as a matter of fact, also this very slideshow, which at the very beginning, if you saw, has the Creative Commons by let's say icon, which means that you can use and reuse this material provided you say you state clearly who did it in the first place. And the care principle, Gabby, you have to help me here because I do not remember the expansion of the acronym, but
I just looked it up because it's hard to remember. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's C is collective benefit, A is authority to control, R is responsibility, and E is ethics.
Okay, and this is a very nice getaway into the discussion that we're going to have later, which is all about ethics concern, legal concerns, and also post-colonialism, restitution in terms of intellectual property, mostly of what we're going to do. In our case, this is also something that we could talk about later in the discussion, because in our case, since we're dealing, one might argue, with documents of people who have, let's say, disappeared hundreds, if not thousands of years ago, it's always the case if the care principle apply, and if so, to whom. But I think I would like to to put a pin in it and talk about this later with our audience, if you all agree.
Absolutely, that was more than I was asking for. It was brilliant. So
Thank you, Gabby.
People who've never heard of it before would
exactly. You're right. I should have put it down in the slide. So, just very quickly, what CGDoc is made of. You've already heard me saying that it is a schema, which is the a chained odd one document does it all. Since we're expanding acronyms right now, it's of the EpiDoc schema, which is also aligned with the TIO schema. It also comprises a template that you've seen before. Also, Nora showed it. Further style sheets and a very highly customized version of FS. Also some encoding guidelines, because I won't go into detail right now, but sigillographic conventions are sometimes different than epigraphic conventions, also in printed catalogs. So we had to customize our output accordingly, and so on. And most importantly, as you can see here, a set of files which are shared by all CGDoc present and future CGDoc projects. For example, authority files, control vocabularies, ontologies, and so on and so forth. I think I will go very quickly on that, because I wanted to show how CGDoc and the digital sigillography project deal with the seal as in a three-dimensional way. So we deal with it as an object, but also as a text-bearing object, so a bearer of text and of image. And let's explore very quickly the text in text-bearing object, and this is how we do that. If you're familiar with EpiDoc or with TI, you will recognize the structure immediately. So we have the text, which has a body, and each body has different divisions. They're called like that, this div. These divisions are all the portions and sub-portions of the text on our seal, which is the edition, the apparatus, the translation, the commentary, the footnotes, and the bibliography. So I have to correct myself. This is not the text of the seal. This is the text of the edition of a seal, because a seal, of course, does not have any footnotes or any bibliography. However, if we are doing the digitally enhanced version of a paper publication, then you might want to reproduce the footnotes as well. And why we felt the need to customize EpiDoc for our needs, because different text-bearing objects very often have different editorial needs, and we also saw that with Nora and her OM alphabet that goes over almost over the whole stone. Let's explore also the object part in text-bearing object. And once again, if you're familiar with TI and with EpiDoc, you might recognize that this one is the structure of the TI header. And without going too much into detail into that, I would like to make a point. regarding the object part of the text-bearing object. This very highly structured tree, if I can say so, translates into very detailed metadata, which explain both the materiality of the object, because remember what we said before, we're not only interested in the text that a support delivers to us, we are interested in the support per se, but also the history of the object. And I took the liberty of just copying and pasting the fields in our FS output that relate to the metadata. And first of all, already here, I mean, even just let's say a quantitative approach, not a qualitative approach, you can say that there's many, right? So we have a lot of metadata that relate to the seal, and they are definitely more than what you would find in a printed publication. And not only they're more explicit. So we have here a way of saying, okay, the date is this one, the dating criteria are this one, and there's also an alternative dating that might or might not be that one. Okay. I highlighted in different colors what are general metadata. The first one, type, general layout, and metrics. What are metadata relating to the materiality of the seal, which goes from medium up to condition. And what is related to the dating of the object in green in the bottom left part of the screen. And also, and this is very relevant to what we're going to say right now, the metadata relating to the history of the object. And by history, we mean both the ancient history, so the history which is contemporary to the object itself, and also the modern one. And in your opinion, what are the metadata which are relevant to our discussion right now? So I would say, but please correct me if you think I'm wrong, that they are this one. So since we're talking about contextual and processual metadata, and right now we're talking about them in the output, so in what the user is seeing, right? I think that find place, together with ancient find spot and modern find spot, together with find date and find circumstances, they make you state explicitly the archaeological context of an item, right? Further, we have modern location, city, country, institution and repository, collection and inventory. So this chunk, it makes you state explicitly where the object is right now, in which institution, which collection, inventory number, and also inventory numbers, let's say, if it moved, right? We're talking here about very small objects that because of different reasons might, be misplaced or displaced from institution to institution, but also from city to city, right? And in this way, it makes clearer, clearer and more explicit everything that has happened with this item before. Further, and almost most importantly than anything else, we have the acquisition, previous location, and modern observation. Something that I forgot to mention at the very beginning, in lead seals, there's a big antiquity market. So if you Google Byzantine lead seal right now, you will be given at least 10 auctions going on this very week, because there's a rekindled passion for this discipline and these subjects that make it very easy to purchase them online. And since they are made out of lead, their intrinsic value is not very high. So it's not as high as a gold coin from the 12th century, for example. And this might create many problems that we're going to address in the discussion, I guess. So here, by complying to the acquisition chunk, you have to state openly where and how you bought it. And this is something that I like to do if I know this bit of information, also how much it has been paid. Some other contextual and processual metadata that are, as the current state of things stands, not in the output, but only in the raw XML file, are, for example, something that you can find on this slide. The license of publication, the reusability potential, for example, is this edition licensed under a Creative Commons license? Can I reuse it? May I reuse it? How can I deal with this question? And also, who funded this? And if we have something, for example, some funder that might be creating a conflict of interest, also stating the conflicts of interest in your data. Furthermore, also permissions. Who gave you the permission? Do you have the permission to publish this material? And if so, is this an official permission? Do you have, let's say, a file number, or is it just, let's say, a gentlemanly permission that with a shake of hand with the curator, you just said, okay, I'm going to publish this, and all of this. Once again, even though all of this information, I mean, you could definitely write them in your monograph, in your paper publication, right? But and this is also what we argued in the required reading for this Sunoikisi session. The digital edition kind of obliges you to be very precise, very clear about everything. And we as scholars, we have to bear this responsibility. And I think with this slide, it would be interesting to start the discussion, if you, Gabby and Nora, agree, because I think that stating that digital edition have to promote openness and transparency, and they also fulfill different objectives, because we do not live in a bubble. We have to cater to social, ethical, and academic objectives. I think that it would be a nice place to stop and to start the discussion. If I can unshare my screen at some point, I'm sorry.
Actually, would you mind leaving the screen?
I will. Okay, I can leave it here. Yeah.
So just so we have it sort of on the slide.
Yeah, you're right.
As we're talking, as a reminder, and we can take that away and have the full screen up at some point if we prefer. I think yes. Well, thank you. Firstly, thank you both for those really useful sort of case studies and further descriptions. Yes, I think this is a really important topic, and the ways in which digital editions can help us to be more transparent, but also ways in which digital editions might hinder us from being as transparent as we would otherwise be, are both worth just sort of thinking about, just checking that we're not forgetting things, that we're not taking things for granted, we're not being too sort of triumphalist that digital is always better and so forth. Just thinking about what challenges there are as well. I think it would be worth sort of thinking about those. This is the point, by the way, speaking to the audience, that we would really like for your comments on any of this as well. So thanks to all of you who've said hi already, but please let us know what you think about this question as well.
Yeah. Wait, I'm just browsing. Sorry.
No, I think it is very important to think about the ways in which digital publication does, and digital encoding does, it brings with it certain expectations of consistency and of reliability that are slightly easier to sidestep in traditional publication, and I think that sort of ability to sort of gloss things or finesse things in a conventional environment, in an analog environment, is something people sometimes find comforting, and it can be a little bit scary to think that that you're sort of required to you're putting your material out there. It's much more accessible. So all things that we think of as unambiguously good things, we get more readers, right? We are more accessible. We're publishing at open access. These things will be much more widely read. They'll be much cheaper. There'll be all these things. All of those things are also things that might make you nervous in certain contexts. That some materials are, that things are findable, does sometimes make some people nervous. Things are accessible, and is something that not everybody thinks of as an unambiguous good. That things are, so I've lost the I briefly. Interoperable. Well, I think probably people more often don't know what that means, rather than thinking it's a bad thing. Things that are reusable. I remember to a comment that a very senior and famous epigraphist said to Charlotte Ruchet 20 years ago when she was publishing one of her first electronic corpora using EpiDoc. She gave a paper at a conference explaining all the benefits of publishing this online, and this one epigrapher came up to her afterwards and said, "But Charlotte, aren't you worried that people will use your inscriptions?" And the idea that people using your scholarship was a bad thing, a thing to be worried about, is mind-boggling to us. But it clearly is. It is a concern.
Exactly.
What they meant was, are people going to copy it? Are they going to steal it? Are they going to plagiarize it? That was, I guess, the sort of thing they had in mind. But
exactly. If I may interject, I had a conversation lately. When I was, I'm always pushing for fair principles. I'm always, always all about findability, and people. I mean, it's also an egoistic thing, right? Because you want, even though epigraphy is a very established discipline, sigillography is less so, right? So you want people to use seals, you want people to use the information that come from seals, right? So that's why we're publishing digitally, because we want not only, that 20 people that can read seals in the world to use them, but we want also the student who has an assignment, who has to write an essay, to also explore seals as a source and a resource, right? It was interesting that when I was pushing for this, I had a pushback saying, yes, so if we do that, we know that we have someone to blame. Instead of crediting someone to because they are putting material for other scholars and students to use and reuse and to comment on, or also to say, okay, I do not like what you did, please engage in a conversation with me. So I think that I think that this would be our very first academic objective to tackle, to shift the paradigm from blame to credit. Because we are people doing the best of our job, and just wanting our endeavors to be read and used. I don't think it's a bad thing, right?
But it's also it's accountability, isn't it? And that's
Exactly.
another word which, if I
That's
say
scary.
It's accountability is unambiguously a good thing, but it's also slightly a scary thing. In academia, we want things to be accountable. We want things to be acknowledged, to be credited to the right people. But also, if we've made mistakes, we want the next generation of scholars, which might be tomorrow, it doesn't have to be in 40 years' time. We want that to be corrected. But on the other hand, we don't like being told we're wrong. We don't like being at a conference and have someone stand up and say no, and so there is a there is a conflict there, and so yeah, there's and it's not just sort of the sort of emotional resistance that in my slightly flippant example, but yeah, we do.
And
do
also
have
pardon. Yeah.
Go ahead, Martina.
No. Also we have, but this is a whole other worm can that we're opening. That it doesn't have to be perfect to be accessible, right? So you don't have to wait 20 years to publish something if it can be done in a good way and in a useful way for those who are actually going to use your data. But this was just a small a small parenthesis.
No, that is a good point. I mean, it's already taking the discipline forward if we publish a preliminary edition, incomplete, imperfect, of some text, and that is already useful. And I agree with you 110%. However, there are definitely people who disagree with that. There are people who will say it's better to wait 50 years and get it right than to publish something shoddy in the interim.
But in the meanwhile, scholarship has gone forward.
Yeah, in the meantime,
these 50 years.
Yeah, there are people who whose entire careers have been carried out in ignorance of the thing that you've been sitting on and not publishing. But yeah, that's something else.
Yeah.
So there is one question a few minutes ago for Martina asking about SunoikisisDC. Is it only designed for lead seals, or would it work for other seals in other materials and other languages and contexts, such as clay seals and wax seals, I guess?
Yes, we are actually. That's why in the initial draft of this slide, I had Byzantine in parentheses, because it has been. I mean, even though it has been, it was born for Byzantine seals, we are actively opening it now for other seals and also for other objects such as stamps or so-called bread stamps in Byzantium, even though it's not clear if they were for bread or not, but also Islamic coins, Byzantine coins. So yes, if it has a support and it has text and or images on it, then it can be definitely encoded with SunoikisisDC. So yeah, that was the goal of everything, pretty much.
Thank you. Nora, did you want to come in on any of these last questions?
Well, just to say that, and I'm sure this happens in a lot of other disciplines as well, but in Celtic studies, even still today, although it's starting to change, but digital editions are not seen as, as, I don't know, scholarly as, the print editions. And that's something that seems to be, taking a while to change. So that's the other, another point as well.
Yes, I really agree with you, if I may. And this is also something that I think the more established among us, people that, let's say, do not put their career at stake, if I can say so brutally, honestly, should, and I really appreciate, for example, Gabby, your curriculum, where you have monographs, but also monograph-like digital resources, right? Because also, when drafting your publication list, there's, always the big chunk of written text, and then at the very end, very small, by the way, I also did this digitally, right? And the more established scholars should push, for recognition, for recognizing digital publication as, as written ones, right? Because the scholarly reasoning and behind it is pretty much the same. It's just that the medium in which you're publishing it is different. It doesn't change anything to the depth of your research if you publish it in EpiDoc rather than on a printed paper. right? And but for example, this is something that we always say in Germany. In order to have your the title of doctor, right, you have to publish your monograph. Even though you're doing something, for example, on the age, you have to publish a monograph. And so it's we should just push for recognition of digital resources as just like the paper, just like if it were a book. And in order to do so, it has to answer to some questions. For example, was it published anywhere else? Is it innovative? It has to undergo a review in a way. And
Peer review.
but exactly, some peer review, and just being accessible, and with an ISBN or some ID that can point to the right resource. And your gold.
That's 95% true. I think there is also certainly in some disciplines and in some areas, it's the case that even a print edition of a bunch of texts, a bunch of inscriptions or coins or whatever else are seen as less prestigious, less scholarly than a monograph in the normal sense of 200 pages of solid text with square margins. And that's not sort of universal. I think now people do get tenure based on epigraphic publications, but there is a sense in which we have this concept of ancillary disciplines. It's there are the scholars, the historians who do the real work, and then there are these people who help us by publishing inscriptions, right? So that I think that doesn't make it less true what you're saying about digital. I think it's just it's a bit of a double jeopardy for digital epigraphers. They're both ancillary and
exactly.
There is another question. We're a little short of time, but a question again for Martina. Alice asks if you can expand on the interesting concept of the metacorpus that you are.
Yes, thank you, Alice. So we kind of agreed to say metacorpus about what we're going to do. So we have many smaller corpora that will be searchable via a big interface where you will be able to search through all of these corpora. So you have the single corpus, and then you have also another access point where you can perform queries across all the corpora that are within this metacorpus, right? As if you had
talking about published by you. Or
exactly, our.
Are some of the small corpora pre-existing corpora from other people elsewhere?
No. It will be only the ones that are, the seal corpora, right? So, and as for now, we don't have any. That's why it will be. The first ones will be the ones that are currently being published within the DigiBit seal project. Yeah. So it will be like a sigillographic search engine, as I like to call it.
But in terms of Alice's question about how this impacts on promoting openness, presumably you want to encourage other people to use SunoikisisDC so that while they're producing their own publication, which could be in print or it could be on their own website or whatever, they can also then contribute to your metacorpus. Or rather, it can be accessible via your metacorpus, let's say.
Exactly like that. Exactly like that. So we would like to, we will push people to publish their collections in SunoikisisDC so that their seals and their collections and their publications will be more easily accessible via this metacorpus, right? And we're also very much pushing for FS so that it has also, let's say, the same search criteria, if I can say so. But the minimum requirement is that they are encoded in SunoikisisDC and according to the guidelines that we're giving, both in terms of semantic markup and in terms of authority files and interlinking between resources. Yeah, so it's we're kind of we're trying to encourage doing so via because it will be more accessible, quite honestly. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. So we're technically at the end of the time we have for this. If anyone has anything else they want to add, please do. And if anyone has any other questions in chat, we can also look at those. But is there? Bleach, I liked your answer.
Thanks.
Anything else anyone wants to sort of add to sum up with? I did mean to say earlier, I won't take up lots of time to say this now, but if you look at if you expand the description of this YouTube video beneath the video, there is a link there to a session page which includes the slides that you can download as PDF, a description of the session, some suggested readings that Martina's already mentioned earlier. They're suggested readings for anyone who wants to. For my students, they're required readings, they're not optional. And also a suggested exercise that you can try, which again for my students is not suggested but obligatory. But other people may have different contexts depending on who instructed you to watch this video. But those should be relatively sort of self-explanatory. But we're also very happy for you to get in touch with us if you have any questions or suggestions or follow-ups on anything we've talked about today. And please do join us next week when we've got a session with another group of colleagues on 3D technologies for imaging and surveying in archaeology. So see you all then. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.